we're going to make him produce accounts for a year that was 2 years later than the year in which the problem arose. So clearly, the most extraordinary lengths are being gone to by the public authorities worldwide to cover up the defalcations and the criminalities of the likes of Al Gore and Pachauri. And they're not actually going to go after any of these people because these people are part of the same establishment that ought to be going after them and bringing them to book.
Well, Lord Monckton, what do we do then with this quandary or this paradox of government stands to have the biggest increase in tax funding in human history?
Yes. A
new form of total feudalism and serfdom is openly being established. So how can the government, that is the beneficiary robber class, the new kings and queens, the new global lords of the people, how then can this group ever judge their own minions, their own operatives, if they're cutting off their own new global religion and funding mechanism?
Well, there you're asking one of the oldest questions in the history of the philosophy of government. And in Latin, it was quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Who will watch over those who are supposed to be watching over us? Who will be the policeman of the policeman? And that's one of the most difficult questions to answer. However, in a democracy, which you still have in America and we don't have here in Europe, because we are now governed by unelected commissars, but you still have a Congress, and the only people who can make laws for you are your elected congressmen and senators under Article 1, Section 1 of your Constitution. 3 magic words will tell you what to do with these wretches. Vote them out.
Well, that brings me to my next issue. How they're regrouping worldwide. They seem to double down in England, double down in the United States, double down in Australia. When one crook gets thrown out, the establishment, especially in the parliamentary system, tends to put an even more extreme person in. But here in the U.S., every incumbent and everyone who's seen as an establishment candidate in all the off-year elections and primaries are being defeated by giant record margins. And the people are so angry that we've never had a political realignment where it was against the entire political system since 1776. And other political scientists agree with me. The polls show it. Usually one party's in favor, another is out of favor. Yeah. This is a total realignment against the entire system. And the system is coming in with Obama saying, well, I'll just restrict your free speech. I'll just put in Chinese-style net censorship. I'll put black boxes in your house. We'll make it illegal, as Cass Sunstein has said at the White House, to say, I don't believe in anthropogenic global warming. I mean, they are, instead of backing off, they're throwing the gauntlet down and saying, I am Tyrannus. I'm coming after you.
That's right. However, the Republicans are beginning to respond to this. They've begun to realize that the Tea Party movement is directed as much at them as it is at the Democrats, telling both parties to raise their game. The Democrats are resorting to insult and, as you say, to police state measures, taking away your Fifth Amendment, not your Fifth Amendment rights, the First Amendment right to free speech, by saying that you won't in future be allowed to say that global warming isn't a problem. That kind of thing is intolerable in a free society. And there is absolutely no way Obama is going to get away with that, because the Republicans are beginning at last to wake up. I've spent a lot of time in Congress over the last year talking to members of both houses, testifying in front of committees of Congress, and one of the things that's become quite apparent is that the Republicans, who were at first a year ago saying, well, we're very happy to argue this on the economics because it makes no sense to do anything about this, even if the problem's as big as the UN says it is. We can all see that, but we don't think we dare get into the science. Now, I said to them very bluntly, I said, look, if you don't get into the science, the other side will simply say, but the planet is at risk, and therefore whatever the economic cost, whatever the economic damage, we have to save the planet, and therefore you have to deal with the science. Otherwise, however sensible your economic argument, the other side will pay
The science is the key, because it takes the moral high ground away from them and shows them to be premeditated fraudsters.
And that is the point which the Republicans have now got very, very firmly on board. There are now many senior figures in both houses. I'm not going to name names, it's not fair to them. They will go public as and when they think it right. who are very clearly understanding that the science doesn't add up anymore, that they have failed and failed and failed again on the other side to produce convincing arguments. And they are now not going to tolerate any form of cap and trade, and they've made that quite plain to the Democrats, which is
all
why
right, Lord Monckton, stay there. Stay there. We got to go to break. Come back and tell us more of what the insiders told you and how you see the eugenicists, the feudalists, the feudal lords striking back at us on the other side. Christopher Monckton, 3rd Viscount of Brenchley and Monckton, is our guest. Scienceandpublicpolicy.org is the key website to see the actual science, the research on what these globalists are up to. Now, this is a short segment. Coming back, we're going to get Lord Monckton's take on BP and Obama publicly blocking the relief efforts. Don't let a good crisis go to waste. We're going to get into some counterattacks against him, which are actually opportunities for us to show the fraud. But finishing up with your travel around the country, the Tea Parties, talking to Congress, legislatures, you're saying you're seeing a real shift.
A real shift in opinion on the Republican side. Of course, the Tea Party movement doesn't believe in the global warming nonsense, and now the Republicans are beginning to realize that they have to tackle the science, they can't ignore it, they have to take the moral high ground away from these creeps, and they're beginning to do it. They're beginning to get into the science, they're beginning to ask questions of the administration that the administration either can't answer or is answering in a way which we can easily prove to be dishonest, and that has begun to make them realize that this is a gigantic global fraud, and they don't like the smell of it, and they're not going to pass cap and trade, even if the oil spill goes on being terrible and makes a mess of the coastline there. They're not going to give in just because of that. That is not a good excuse for rushing for cap and trade. So they're going to stand very firm on this, and there will be no nonsense. And if Obama tries to reintroduce cap and trade in the Senate, he will fail again.
But he's doing the same thing now. It's been confirmed. The White House is not retracting it. Just like 2 weeks before the White House admitted it, they said, we're going to sue Arizona. And then later the White House admitted that. Now he's saying he's going to sign an executive order to just open up the borders completely, which literally is an act of treason against our sovereignty. And he's now promised to have the EPA implement a whole group of carbon taxes by dictatorial executive edict.
I know, and the more he does this, and the more the people who listen to your show and the others who point out what's going on hear this and talk to one another about it, the more certain it is that in the midterm elections he will perhaps more or less certainly lose the House. And the way he's going, he could even lose the Senate as well, though that'll be harder, I think. But he's certainly no longer going to have control of Congress. And therefore, he is increasingly being driven back on the realization that his days of passing grand legislative projects like healthcare reform are over. Cap and trade is not going to go through the Senate, and that therefore he will have to increasingly try to rule by decree, because that's what an executive order is. However, executive orders are not legislation. They can be reversed by the next incoming president overnight. And all the Republicans have to do is to say that whoever they choose as president, every single one of these high-handed executive orders will simply be cancelled by a single executive order nullifying the lot. And that will be the end of that. So the fact that he can't now control Congress means that he's becoming increasingly desperate, and the more desperate he becomes, the more he will lash out, because he is very petulant. I mean, he's behaved, if you look at the way he dismissed General McChrystal, who's a very good general, and put in General Petraeus, who is a formidable general, so at least we've now got another very good general on the spot. But that kind of behavior is calculated to demoralize your troops on the ground. Okay, so the general made some incautious remarks which weren't very polite about the administration. Just get used to it, Obama. You're in politics, and sometimes even your own troops are going to say things that maybe they shouldn't say. But if you go around sacking them just because they exercise their right of free speech and you're the commander-in-chief, well, yes, you have the constitutional power to do that, but the electorate has the constitutional power to do it to you. So Obama, because of that action against the military, because of these threats of making executive orders, because of your utter failure to deal with the BP oil spill in an efficient way, you, sir, are going to be dismissed by your commander-in-chief, which is the voters of the United States of America.
We're going to get into BP after the break, but briefly, how is the UN regrouping? I mean, we know they're trying to get cap and trade in at an even regional level, having the bureaucracy come in and, in one case, get the city of Austin to more than triple power prices in the next 3 years to pay some nebulous organization. But when we come back, but go ahead and get started now, how are they internationally regrouping right now?
Oh, that's a very interesting one, yes. We'll certainly deal with that when we come back.
And then specifically how we counter them with Lord Monckton. In the 30 seconds we've got left, tell folks some of the material that we'll learn at your website.
Right. The most important things we do are a series of scientific papers which come out at regular intervals, all written in plain language so that a layman can understand it, explaining why, on various aspects, the science of climate change is not a problem.